So I am Irma Donaldson. I'm currently the Deputy Chair of the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists, and I'm going to be chairing this session this afternoon, looking at professional experience and diversity. I know that it's going to be an interesting time, and I'm really sorry that we have started late. So I am going to try and make sure that we keep to time as much as possible for those who are presenting. Our first presenter is Melanie Greal, who has just dropped off. So she's obviously having technical issues with trying to come in. So I'm wondering actually whether or not we could go to our next set of presentations and come back to Melanie. Over to you, Oliver and Fraser, if you'd like to start with your presentation, and I will have to adapt the timings ever so slightly to enable us to cover as many people as possible, if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem. We'll try to get through it a little bit quicker.
Thank you.
Start sharing. Okay, can everyone see that? Okay.
We have a white screen at the moment, so I think it's probably just taking some time to think. Here we are.
Seems good.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Perfect. Off you go.
Great. Okay. Welcome to our presentation. If you don't see someone who looks like you, it's a barrier, an exploration of gender diversity and action plans. So presenting today, you've got myself, Fraser Wakeling, and with me is Oliver Coulthard. We'll be taking it in turns to present throughout the presentation, so you will get to hear from both of us. I'm currently in my second year of the Masters at Manchester Met University, and Oliver is an NQP working in primary schools. We're both part of a small team of SLTs and SLT students called Speech Therapist Links, who advocate for the profession, run online events, and produce research in the field. The other members of the team you can see on the screen are Kate and Serena, who founded the group, Jack, Yiting, and Andrea, who all helped put this piece of research together. We do also appreciate the irony of two white men discussing privilege and representation, and we're not here at all to say who should and shouldn't be an SLT, but rather identify barriers to the profession and strive to make it more accessible to everyone. We'd also like to highlight that this is our first ever conference, so please do go easy on us. Okay. So a little bit of the background to why this research is needed. So it's a fairly well-known fact by now that men only make up 3% of SLTs, but little research has been carried out to look into other gender minorities such as trans and non-binary people. We also looked into studies which identify potential barriers to the field, and the RCSLT found that stereotyping, lack of representation, and limited progression are key barriers. The second of these ties in quite nicely with the quote used in our title: "If you don't see someone who looks like you, it's a barrier." Our preliminary questionnaire showed that 12% of respondents did not agree that more needed to be done to diversify speech and language therapy, which raises the need and the question around tokenism and avoiding that. So this research aims to investigate this further. So it gives us our why, and I'll hand over to Oliver to run you through our how.
Yeah, so the aims you can see in front of you are the two that we identified that would be the most prominent focus for our research. So we wanted to identify, one, if SLTs identified barriers to minority genders joining the profession, and then two, any potential differences between the participants that were surveyed, depending on whether they were a part of the gender minority or the gender majority. And then following this, we wanted to find out that if barriers were perceived, what the different categories of participants thought could be the potential strategies to prevent and or tackle these barriers. So within our methodology, we carried out this survey using a Google online form that we sent out to other professionals within our network, such as universities and the societies. And this was also presented on social media pages relating to speech and language therapy. The survey was available to complete online for approximately 1 month, allowing for people to take their time over the completion, and that they didn't have a time constraint, which might have impacted on the amount of information people were able to give. It was also anonymous when people completed it, and no identifiable information was recorded. The only personal data that was noted included the participants' county, the time in their jobs, so whether they were in NQP, whether they'd been practicing for 2 years, 3 years, etc., and their job roles, whether this was paediatrics, adults, and any specialties they had within that. Involved in the creation of the survey were 3 gender minority SLTs, myself and Fraser included, and we were supported by a variety of qualified SLTs that Fraser mentioned earlier. The survey consisted of both open and closed questions in order to maximise the number of responses, as well as taking into account time efficiency within analysis for us as researchers and the biases that may have been involved. Questions explored all but not limited to the following questions: participants' gender identity, perceived barriers, suggested action plans, and any quotes the participants wish to provide to current SLTs within the gender minority. The thematic analysis of the responses was conducted by all of us as researchers until an agreement was met, and responses were categorised into the following themes: stereotypes, pay/career progression, limited role models, lack of awareness of the profession/its role, and no barriers perceived. And the responses could be categorised as more than one theme, and it was analysed according to this.
So as for results, the first graph that you can see on the screen showed that we had 104 respondents in total, and the breakdown of this is shown. So women comprised the majority, making up 78%, whilst men made 19%, non-binary 2%, and 1% trans femme. So this translates to 81 women, 20 men, 2 non-binary people, and 1 person identifying as trans femme. Going forward, we categorised women as gender majority and all other respondents as gender minority. Results came from various counties across England. We also had some respondents from Scotland and some from further afield in the USA and Canada. As part of our survey, we asked a variety of questions to the participants about their views on gender diversity in SLT and barriers to the profession. These questions, as Oliver said, were open-ended and allowed the participants to write as much or as little as they wished. And we decided this was the most appropriate way to gain results so that biases weren't placed on the participants by having them tick pre-established themes. So the first responses we'll look at are to answer to what extent they agreed that more needs to be done to increase gender diversity. And as you can see, almost 60% of both gender majorities and gender minorities strongly agree that more needs to be done. However, a clear disparity is in the agree and neutral categories, with 32% of gender majorities agreeing to the statement, but only 9% of gender minorities agreeing. This is then inverse for the neutral category. Importantly, 5% or less of both gender groups disagreed or strongly disagreed to the statement, highlighting a need to increase gender diversity in SLT. And interestingly, more gender minorities disagreed with the statement, which highlights the need to avoid tokenism. So just simply diversifying the profession without reason. And this will be discussed in more depth later. But another question asked was regarding the participants' thoughts on the barriers to joining SLT. So these questions allowed for a little bit more in-depth research into what might be stopping gender minorities joining the profession. So the theme with the largest amount of responses was gender stereotypes and social perception, suggesting that more needs to be done to change the perceptions and attitudes of the general public and those within speech and language therapy. Representation also forms a large proportion of the results, although gender majorities tend to give more weight to the stereotypes than gender minorities, and lack of awareness is noted to be a considerable barrier by both minorities and majorities. The same picture is seen for pay and career progression, with both gender groups responding similarly to this theme. Perhaps the most surprising statistic here is that more gender minorities felt there were no barriers when compared with the opinions of gender majority respondents. And I'll leave it to Oliver to explain this later on in the presentation. So what suggestions did we receive for how to combat these barriers?
So the participants in the gender majority established 3 main action plans that we categorised that believed they would have the greatest impact on increasing the gender diversity within SLT. So this included further education and training, for example, to prospective students, showcasing profiles of minority representatives, such as having those of the gender minority presented on RCSLT or CEN posters or on social media in other ways, and increasing diversity in leadership roles, suggesting that at present these leadership roles aren't diverse enough to represent the wider population. On the other side, the gender minority participants also presented what they thought could be the most useful impact on gender diversity. This included external initiatives such as male CENs, identifying that there needs to be an increase in diverse CEN to support those within minority and uplift those voices. Advocacy from organisations such as the RCSLT, such as speaking about the diversity on a more open platform, and educating younger generations and patients about the role of men and others in the profession. So as you can see from both of these results, both sets of participants bring forward suitable, actionable strategies to support gender diversity. And overall, there's a wide belief that there should be more education and representation of gender diversity and its role within speech therapy. So I'll now explore the interesting statistic that was brought up during our barrier-related question. So we've provided some quotes from the participants who responded, identifying that they did not think there was any barriers, which was 6% of our participants. So quotes included ideas such as, "There's nothing stopping men," which suggests the only barrier is interest in the field. "Many workplaces are short-staffed," suggesting that some parts of the profession may not face lack of gender diversity, and the need for overwhelming need for workers actually presses past that, and another quote suggesting that gender diversity should not become a tick box exercise and that it doesn't matter as long as patients are getting the care that they deserve. So Fraser will now continue exploring what should be done with this information gained from the research we found.
Okay, so yeah, what does this all actually mean for us? So although the vast majority of respondents agreed that there are barriers for gender minorities joining the profession, it's important to recognise that some people perceive no barriers, which illustrates a need to avoid tokenism, putting the emphasis on diversifying competencies and personal knowledge and qualities as an SLT, rather than just solely focusing on gender. The difference in perceived barriers between gender majorities and minorities shows that different groups suggest different interventions. So gender majorities suggest raising the representation profile of minority groups, for example, collaborative events with the RCSLT and UK SLT Pride Network, whereas gender minorities suggest advocacy platforms may be the solution. So advocating for speech and language therapy in careers fairs. Finally, benefits may include better representation of service users and patients. So some people may feel more comfortable with an SLT of the same or different gender as them, and increasing representation and being a role model in the field are key to decreasing preconceived ideas of the role. So just to summarise, the majority of respondents from both gender minorities and majorities believe there are barriers to the profession, but importantly not all, and this needs to be considered when proposing solutions. In line with previous research, stereotyping, lack of awareness and limited representation are identified to be the biggest barriers. And finally, education, training and advocacy were all suggested as key strategies to diversifying SLT as a profession, representing patients as well as possible. We've got our references on the slide there, and do feel free to link with us as well. Like I say, we are a team of students and qualified speech therapists, so feel free to follow us on any of the links shown on the screen. We've rattled through that quite quickly, but hopefully that gives you some time to recoup what we lost at the start. So. Yeah.
Thank you, Oliver and Fraser, for being so succinct in your presentation. And we have got a couple of comments that have come up in the chat that, you know, really interesting and really important research. There's more that we need to explore. I think you've raised questions, confirmed things that have been known before, but also other questions that need to be explored, I suspect. So let's move on, and I'm wondering whether or not, Melanie, you are able to hear us now? I'm looking at you. Can you hear us? You can. Awesome. Would you like to come with your presentation looking at unique position to make a difference? So looking at the experience and the practice of autistic speech and language therapists. So Melanie, over to you. Thank you. Oh, we can't hear you, Melanie. No, we can't hear you. And we can see your screen, which is very interesting. It's taking us into multiple loops. So that's right. That's better, but we actually can't hear you speaking. Okay, I'm wondering whether or not, while you try and work through your, if you would like to stop sharing, Melanie, and I'll go to another presentation and come back to you, and we'll see if we can get your microphone sorted out. That will be amazing. So let's see, Izzy can't get in. Is that still the case, or is Izzy here with us now? No, we've got Marion and Victoria. Let's have a look. Shame. Marion, are you wanting
Can you hear me now?
Oh yes, absolutely can.
Sorry, I was muted. I was trying to speak and I couldn't find
No,
it.
that's absolutely fine. Yes, you've come through loud and clear, Marion.
Yeah, I've got Izzy's slides. So I'll step in for Izzy, and Victoria and I'll do that together. So shall I share these slides and see if that can work?
Thank you for stepping in to do that. And it's just a shame that Izzy's having the challenges that she is.
Although, oh yeah, window. Let's see if it'll share a window. Now I'm having
yes, it's coming up.
Who knows what that all is that's happening, but I'll try and can you see these?
It looks like it's wanting to show us something in that we've got, yes, it's coming through now.
Oh, it's coming through.
I'm not certain that we're seeing the right screen though, because we've got the chat and the attendees.
Oh, okay. Let me try again then. So I tried sharing a window. Let's see what the other thing is. Sorry, guys.
No, not at all. I think we're all being particularly challenged right now.
So it's not allowing me to share the entire screen. So it's only allowing me to share a window, and then it does that thing. I don't know if anybody can advise. Oh, is that the slideshow? I can't see. Yeah, this could be working, I think.
Let's have a look. At the moment, we're seeing you. I think there are still issues.
What are you seeing now? Because I can only see my slides now.
Give us a couple of seconds, because I think your slides are trying to come up, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we're seeing slides.
People in the chat are saying they can see slides with comments underneath it. I'm not seeing anything.
Okay, so our talk
so go ahead.
Yeah, listening to and learning from the experience of autistic professionals working in health and education. So thanks for joining us today. Apologies for the glitches. My name's Marion Rutherford. Izzy Utley sadly hasn't been able to get in, but is probably listening. And Victoria Johnston-Cook is here as well. And we all work for the National Autism Implementation Team in Scotland, and we're all speech and language therapists. So we'll be presenting our current research study. And NATE is a Scottish Government-funded practitioner research partnership based at Queen Margaret University. And our work supports local implementation of evidence-informed practice across the lifespan within a neurodiversity paradigm. So today we're going to cover a bit about the background and methodology of the study, followed by a focus on the outcomes and recommendations. And below are the details of a range of people who've been involved in the study. And these are some of our contact details, and any future publications and resources that arise from the study we'll share through these different mediums. And we'll start with a bit of background and the aims of the study. So very briefly, we'd like to explain some of NATE's positionality as it reflects the approach that we take to our research. And these are our key messages. We take a neurodiversity affirming approach as an organisation, and our research team includes autistic members as well. We know from previous research that autistic people are underrepresented in the workforce, and again, we've heard that again today. We also know that autistic people experience discrimination and poor mental health within the workplace, and there's been a focus recently in research on experiences of autistic doctors, with Autistic Doctors International leading the way in this area with some really groundbreaking research. However, there is a gap in the literature in understanding and exploring the experiences of other health professionals. And as we know, education and caring professions are frequently destinations for autistic graduates, and this seems to be a key group of professionals whose experiences we need to know more about. So our research aims were to think about how the sensory, physical and environment contribute. So we asked, sorry, I'm reading slides that I'm not as familiar with as Izzy. We asked about what supportive and negative factors do autistic professionals describe in their experiences of training and recruitment? How does the environment contribute to outcomes for autistic professionals? And what recommendations do autistic professionals make about changes or improvements in training? I'll now talk you through some of our methodology and our procedures and how we analyse the data. So as you can see, we interviewed 34 participants. Based on the study inclusion criteria, participants had to be autistic professionals in health and education with two or more years of experience employed in this role. We included people who self-identify as autistic, and of those who were diagnosed, most were diagnosed as adults, and only 2 participants had had an autism diagnosis when they were children. Additional demographic data was collected, and as you can see here, some examples of the professional roles. Each participant completed a 60 to 90-minute interview online, which focused on training, recruitment, current work, disclosure of autism, and recommendations. Interviews were recorded on MS Teams and professionally transcribed verbatim, and then thematic analysis was undertaken using in vivo. The interviews were recorded on Microsoft Teams and then transcribed by a professional transcription service. And thematic analysis was used as a framework to analyse the data. So as a team, we grouped and refined the data into codes, and then these codes were reviewed through discussion between some of the team members, and through these discussions, categories and themes were identified in the data. Following this, and prior to sharing the findings, we've held focus groups with colleagues in HR, management, and equity inclusion leads, and also with our neurodivergent partners. And I'll pass you over to Victoria to talk about the findings and outcomes.
Hi there, I'm Victoria. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties we've had today. I think this is my slide sharing, so I'm just going to put them back up again. I don't know if those have changed to a sort of smaller screen for anyone. Great, and if anything goes wrong, please just jump in and let me know. So I'm going to talk about the findings and the data that we collected. So there were some key themes that emerged. The first one that a lot of people spoke about was around disclosure, so confidence to disclose, often creating this, workplaces proactively offering accommodations, and then also people's accommodations need to be available without the pressure to disclose their neurodivergence in the workplace. There was also a lot of discussion of kind of how to disclose, whether participants wanted to tell colleagues themselves or have someone else advocate on their behalf, and that kind of repetitive process that a lot of people have spoken about. Participants also described the value of reducing stigma and promoting individual agency around that disclosure process. The key theme that emerged was the kind of stressors in the sensory and the social environment for participants in the study. So sensory stressors might include office lighting or background noise, temperature. Social stressors were a little bit more complicated in some ways, so they mainly arose from attitudes, participants feeling pressure to fit in, for example, maybe joining a social situation during a work break, and many participants spoke about that made it really draining kind of time. And this brings us to neurotypical bias around communication and around interaction and learning styles. So for process during recruitment for professional roles, recruiters might make decisions based on unconscious bias, for example, around things like use of eye contact and those social markers for confidence and professionalism in the interviewee's nonverbal communication. And this is related to concern that organisations are more likely to hire more of the same. Representation and visibility of neurodiversity in the workplace. And again, those key themes are really things that have been covered already today, which has been really interesting to hear. We also describe barriers to effective communication, so a need for clear, direct statements in things like handovers and appraisals and guidance documents. So masking was an experience that was described by many participants. This led to burnout for some professionals. Career paths might reflect these, describing staying in roles they were overqualified for due to just the perceived stress of change and possibly also of the interview process itself, being unable to work full time or struggling to return to in-person working due to the barriers in the workplace. And when they spoke about identifying and negotiating reasonable adjustments within qualification routes and the workplace, participants shared that they were either offered one-size-fits-all support that did not reflect their lived experience, or they had to start from scratch and struggled to find examples and precedents of what was possible and what was reasonable. So I'm just going to go on to speak about some of the recommendations that arose from the data that we collected. So participants shared their recommendations for employers and recruitment teams and professional training providers, such as university licensed educators. Autistic professionals also described that they would like what they would like to see covered in autism training for colleagues and for educators and for employers. They included raising awareness of neurodiversity in workplaces and higher education, recognizing neurotypical bias around communication and learning styles, and creating spaces where autistic people feel confident about disclosing support needs, and also proactively and systematically offer these accommodations. So I've got here some more kind of concrete examples of how this might look in a workplace or in a recruitment process. So it might be, for example, having a set workspace, avoiding that kind of hot desking. So giving someone a set workspace with consideration of what that sensory environment meant to them. For example, being next to a window or not being in the noisiest part of the office. Offering a quiet space for downtime during breaks so that they actually are breaks. Sometimes removing pressure on everyone in the team to attend things like social events. A lot of particularly teachers spoke about how stressful it was to suddenly have unstructured time, especially with new colleagues, which they would really have appreciated not having that pressure to attend as part of their professional role, which they saw as unrelated to that social event. Also, a lot of participants suggested the sharing of things like timetables, interview questions, meeting agendas in advance, and that also includes sticking to those. So if you have a set time that something's going to be, people were saying it was really useful if they stuck to that time. So it's just about that kind of clear and direct communication. So that would be things like appraisals, guidance, handovers. Participants also really said that they would find it useful to have autistic peer support within their workplace, and maybe some kind of mentoring, but also the kind of job carving. So that's a term that would describe maybe fitting the job to the person. So playing to someone's strengths. And I'm just kind of taking a really affirming view of what is something that this person is good at. And not just having that one-size-fits-all approach to what that job needs to look like. So here are some of the outputs that have come so far from the study. There are more, I think, to come. So there are the academic publications, but we've also got these practical guidance documents upcoming. And there's also some training content for higher education institutions and for workplaces, for managers, for HR, equity leads. The last thing we thought we would put as part of our presentation is just the direct quotation from one of our participants, which I think says it all. And the whole point of this study was letting people speak for themselves. So I have this quotation. I'm not going to try and read it out, but I think it's really, it sums up a lot of the data that we got and just the engagement from people. So it was really wonderful hearing everyone's wisdom and views. And I think that it's just useful to hear people's own words. So I'm going to come away from that now. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Victoria, for and also Marion for stepping in and being a proxy Izzy. Oh, my sound went garbled then, but there were smiles, so I think that was a positive comment anyway. In terms of the things that you found, it's interesting how well it's resonating and matching with the earlier keynote session that we had that came through from the network. So that's interesting to see that coming from different angles, things are resonating in a similar way. And it would be really interesting to see the full report outputs that you got from that research and the ongoing work that's going to happen with that as well. Okay, I'm wondering, Melanie, how are we doing? You can hear me?
I can hear you,
yes.
Can you?
And we can hear you! She says, I
Oh,
celebrate that. Awesome. So I think what we will do is we will slip straight away into the presentation that you're going to give us, Melanie, and then what we will need to do is to carve out, take down time from the question and answer session, unfortunately. But I think if people have got questions coming through, there has been a suggestion from Oliver and Fraser that if you want to ask them any questions in the Q&A, they'll attempt to answer that way. And I think for Victoria and for Marion, similarly, can we use the Q&A function and see if it works for us? Even though, oh no, Melanie's just disappeared from my screen. Oh no, that's really unfortunate. That is really unfortunate. So I'm sure she's going to be trying to come back in. I'm not sure what has happened as to why she's been kicked off, but we can maybe have some questions right now for either Fraser and Oliver and Marion and Victoria until Melanie comes back in. It would be, you know, great if there are any questions. There are lots of comments coming through, not necessarily questions per se. There was one question I picked up for you, Fraser and Oliver, asking about how your work compares across AHPs. Do you aware across allied health professionals, how speech and language therapy sits in terms of the gender differences and the things that you found, and actually what the general picture is for the student body at the moment? I don't know if you've got any thoughts or comments that you can add to that query.
Fraser, do you want to take it? I know we're both sat going, who's going to answer?
Yeah, sure. It's yeah, we haven't actually, it's maybe something that we overlooked, but we haven't actually looked into other AHPs and how SLT sort of compares. I know with student population, things are tending to balance out a little bit more. That's only from personal experience and sort of cohorts that I've seen coming through. Tends to be a bit more of a increased gender diversity. So hopefully things are beginning to change, but I think you know, our research showed that there's still quite a few barriers in place. We did have another comment as well. I don't know if Oliver, if you want to take that one, sort of regarding. I'm just trying to find it in the
Yes, I was also trying to scroll up for the find it.
Anecdote.
Decided to
Spoken
was
to.
one
That's right, Melanie, you're coming. Started talking over you. Carry on.
I was just going to say there was a comment on the grouping of cis men with trans and non-binary people.
Right. Yeah.
Oliver, if you just want to explain that.
Yes, yeah. So our research didn't specifically focus on that. That's absolutely something we would love for research.
Oliver's just dropped off as well. We are pressing through regardless. Okay, so that's something, an area that probably needs to be looked at and delved into a little bit further, in terms of seeing whether or not there are differences that are there. He's obviously desperately trying to come back in, and Melanie, I can see that you're sharing a screen, but we can see, we're not seeing your slides, we're seeing ourselves. So I don't know if you want to try sharing again. Now that I've got voice, you can hear us, we can hear you, and then hopefully we can see your slides as well. I was just going to add to Oliver and Fraser. That's okay. Anecdotally, I know that there are courses this year who are celebrating the fact that they've got more male students starting this year than they've had before. But when we're talking about an increase, it might be an increase from 3 to 7 out of the whole cohort of people that have come in. So it's an increase, but yet not representative of our population, and there's still more to understand in terms of the barriers, I think, because once we understand the questions, we can think about what the solutions might be, more and have more targeted. And Melanie's dropped off again. I've noted in the chat that some groups have gone to MS Teams in order to continue with their presentations, and I'm just wondering whether or not we give Melanie just another chance. She's coming back in. If nothing, we've got perseverance happening in this group, so that's amazing. Resilience and perseverance, those are very good attributes for speech and language therapists. So Melanie, how are you doing? You can hear us?
Me now?
We can hear you.
Okay,
Do you want to have a go at trying to share your screen?
Screens or...
No weird screens, not yet.
Okay, so I really see the time. So how do you want to play it?
So in terms of the time, we actually can go until 10 past. So you probably will still be able to get your presentation in, but what we won't get much chance to do is a wider question and answer. But as I said, if we can get things in the comments or in the question and answer, the Q&A tab, we might be able to pick it up from there. And I've noted the question that if we don't get through the presentations, if they can be recorded and shared later. But do you know what? We're going to push through and see if we can get this done. Go ahead, Melanie.
That sounds good. However, I can't share my screen. So I don't know. Is anyone from IT able to help? Or perhaps I can just present some findings.
I was going to say, could you? Absolutely. And we will hopefully then be able to access the slides at a later date if that's not working for you, because it would be lovely to actually hear some of, even if we can't hear and see, which would obviously be a greater benefit, but let's see how we go.
Great, and I'm very, very sorry about the technical difficulties, but also really want to say how happy I am to join this conversation today with you and to share some of the findings of our study on the experiences and practices of autistic speech and language therapists. So this study is actually one of the 3 studies that make up my PhD, and I want to acknowledge my supervisors, Dr. Jenny Gibson and Dr. Napoleon Katsos, who have really greatly contributed to the study, and also want to acknowledge the funders of my PhD, who are the ESRC, DTP Cambridge, and Autistica. So now, in terms of background of the study, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because we've had amazing presentations before the keynote this morning, the Disability and Neurodiversity group at lunch, and the presentation that you just heard previously. So, but yeah, just to reiterate that in terms of employment and autism, there's still many gaps, and luckily we're starting to see some research to identify some of the challenges, but also the solutions to promote accessible opportunities for employment to autistic people. Now there's lots of challenges that have been expressed. There's one that I really want to highlight for the field of SLT, and it's this notion of occupational typecasting, which happens when we kind of reduce people to a certain type and a certain skill set and say, okay, for example, autistic people are really good at math, so they're going to be great engineers. And that's very unhelpful. That just reinforces stigma. That doesn't consider people as whole, and actually it really reduces our opportunities to explore how different people contribute in very unique and valuable ways in different professions. So we're really trying to move beyond that. And there's some really exciting research happening in now looking at the experiences of autistic people in very different professions. And I think in the previous presentation, you heard about autistic teachers, autistic doctors, and it's really within this context that I'm positioning myself and this research, really trying to see what are the unique value, challenges, and solutions to promote inclusion and diversity in the field of SLT for the members of our community as a profession. Lots more background, but I'm just going to skip that. In terms of the study that we did, so now I'm moving into the aims and methods of the study. So we conducted a qualitative study on the experiences and practices of autistic speech and language therapists. And the view was to document their views, but also to start to inform some of the recommendations to improve their well-being in the workplace, and also start to build on their insights to really transform SLT services into becoming more neurodiversity affirming services. So we conducted semi-structured interviews with 8 autistic SLTs. We did quite a bit of piloting before to get it right. And very importantly, we followed some of the guidance in autism research on how to promote meaningful engagement with autistic participants. And that includes strategies around, being very flexible around the format of the interview to make sure that people with autism feel very comfortable and in this safe environment to be able to engage and share their insights. It's also about asking about terminology preferences so that they really appreciate and feel recognized in the discourse that you had during the interview. So it's a shame that you don't see on my slides, but I have some of the characteristics of the participants, but just very briefly, we had 7 female and 1 male SLT with quite a wide range of clinical experience. They were practicing in both the UK and others in the US. 6 out of 8 had a formal diagnosis of autism and 2 self-identified. Very interestingly and very importantly, all of them have been diagnosed in their adult life, so late diagnosis, and most of them disclose being autistic in the workplace. There's a few more characteristics about the participants, but I'm going to skip that for the time limit that we have. Okay, so we did the interviews, we transcribed the interviews, and then we used reflexive thematic analysis, our approach to analyze the data, following the guidance by Brown and Clark 2022. And we used a hybrid inductive and deductive coding approach. And here, you're actually quite lucky that you can't see my slides because there's a very complicated theoretical framework that I wanted to talk you through to conceptualize the experiences of professionals working in the field of disability. And there's lots of it's a really good framework to start to identify the different components and the different considerations that can regulate your experiences in the workplace, and how being autistic as the subject of your activity in the SLT profession, how that impacts other components that regulate your professional role. So I'm gonna skip that. Hopefully, oh yeah, I should have said that actually this study is available as a preprint. So anything that you're missing out from not seeing my slides, you can actually see them in the preprint, and I will put the link in the chat. Okay, so moving on to the findings. So if you look at the whole framework, as I said, there's different components, and what's really important is that we mapped the themes onto those different components of the model, and that actually shows that at the end, the whole model was colored because being autistic impacted all aspects of your professional life. So that's a really important finding in itself, because it shows that when we think about the agenda on diversity and inclusion, it really requires this integrated approach that really considers everything, because it's all very interlinked. Okay, we had quite a few findings. I'm just gonna highlight 3, if that's okay, if we have time. Yeah, I can see people nodding. So in terms of thinking of the SLTs themselves, what was very important is how they express a very nuanced and rich identity. And that couldn't really just be captured as being autistic. That's really to reductionist issues or considerations around gender, sexual orientation, neurodivergence as a much more complex identity, and disability sometimes associating as being disabled or not. It really created this highly nuanced approach. So I think I heard that as I was trying to sort out my audio, but it's about this one-size-fits-all approach is just not going to work. So those findings really resonate with that. So yeah, that's one of the findings. Another finding is around the importance of relationships in the workplace. So in your professional role, it's very rare that you're going to be working just on your own. And usually you rely on others for different tasks, different assignments, and especially in the therapy world, there's a lot of communication and interaction with colleagues, with managers, with caregivers. And here, the participants really told us about mixed experiences with their colleagues in terms of interactions. And the qualities that they highlighted, that they valued about their colleagues, is not questioning their autistic identity. So that was very important for them to feel validated in their identity. And let me think. There were also, feeling like their views around disability, communication, interaction were also validated and could really inform the service developments. So there's quite a few more recommendations in the paper. I'm not going to go through everything today, but yeah, a few recommendations on how colleagues can also very much play a very important role into making sure that autistic members of our community feel more included. And the last finding that I wanted to highlight is when therapists actually provided therapy services with clients, it's this very, very strong empathy that was very much regulated a lot of their services and really informing their therapeutic approach. So building this very strong connection with autistic clients, but also people with communication differences and other challenges, but really appreciating what it means. And that meant that they felt that they could really build on this connection to create a trust relationship that was so important towards achieving very positive outcomes for the clients. Okay, so much more else to say, but I can see the clock ticking. So I'm just gonna, perhaps if I have time, 1 more minute on 3 key messages to conclude my presentation. And these are more like advice and recommendations for the audience. So the first one is to, from the study, we really saw that autistic SLTs have many profession-specific strengths and advantages. And that really means that we can adopt strength-based approaches in employment processes that really recognize and value their strengths and optimize their work experiences and promote innovation in the field of speech and language therapy. A second key message is around the very intricate links between autistic SLTs occupational lives, but also their personal lives, because a lot of them realized being autistic through entering and navigating the profession. So here we have a very good opportunity for SLT institutions to step up as early and continuing support systems for the workforce. And obviously there's the critical time of early career, like professionals, as they may start to engage and start to realize their autistic identity, but also nurturing long-term support. And finally, the last message is that autistic SLTs also faced quite a few challenges, and some of them were actually amplified in the context of this communication and disability-oriented profession. And here, centering the voices of autistic SLTs in SLT training, practice, and research is very fundamental to progress this agenda. And also promoting reasonable accommodations, peer support systems, and advocacy groups are very powerful mechanisms to achieve this goal. I am going to stop here. That's all for me. Thank you so much. And again, apologies for the lack of slides and everything else.
No problem at all, Melanie. There was a suggestion that maybe the slides could be shared at a later date with this recording that goes out to everybody. But what I want to say is to everybody that presented today, thank you so much for persevering with us and for being flexible with the order and with the way that you presented. We have managed to get through the presentations that we wanted to for this session, so I thank you for that. I'm just sorry for those who have joined that they've not had maybe the same opportunity to ask questions and get the answers to those questions as maybe in other sessions, but nonetheless, the research that has been shared has been valuable research. As I said, across all 3 of the presentations, actually, I think there are questions that have been stimulated for further input and further research, which is only a good thing, I think. So thank you, everybody, for your contributions. Thank you for your perseverance. Thank you for your resilience. And thank you for those of you who joined the session and have another end of the technical issues that we've had today. So apologies for that again, but hopefully it didn't detract too much from your experience.